Welcome back to ASPA 2021. Thank you so much for staying tuned. We have an exciting lineup of speakers, and kicking off the afternoon, I have someone no stranger to the Malaysian aerospace industry. To talk about future technologies and Coopetition, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Najib Muhammad Noor, Chief Executive Officer of Strand Aerospace Malaysia. Najib, apart from being the CEO of Strand Aerospace, he is also the president of Malaysia Aerospace Industry Association. He has over 20 years' experience as an aerospace engineer supporting the design and development of commercial aircraft and aerospace companies. Now, a little bit about the topic. The development of future technologies require high investment in terms of time, money, resources, and competencies. Hence, Coopetition could be the ideal way to progress faster and effectively. But how do we do it across disciplines and across borders? The floor is yours, Najib.
Hello. Thank you very much for the introduction, Cynthia. Very proud to be here today to introduce some of these topics which I've actually been working on over the last few years in collaboration with MTDC in some instances. As I was introduced, I'm from the aerospace industry, an industry very known for Coopetition, and I will give you some examples of that as we go along in these presentations. So I'll be about 40 minutes and then some time for questions and answers. So first point I'd like to make is that the world is changing, and it's changing at a very rapid pace. This is a song by Bob Dylan in the 60s, and I think the lyrics reverberate very much the same today. You know, I take especially the verse there. There's a battle outside, and it's raging, and soon your windows will be shaking, and it will rattle your walls, and the times are changing. And this is what we feel today that's happening in the industry. Aerospace in particular, we see these massive changes happening due to climate pressures, and now brought on forward by the COVID-19 epidemic, right? So when we look at, this is a graph which I think many people have seen, or a table many people have seen, and if you look at the top of the chain in terms of companies which are now taking over the top 10 most capitalized companies, you see a lot of technology companies in that space. So what it is to be a successful company in this day and age is changed quite significantly, and today companies are being invested in for their potential for growth. Some industries like the oil and gas industries are now beginning to be seen as sunset industries, so therefore the potential for growth is perceived to be less, right? And you'll find that new pressures to do with the environment are also now featuring in investors' mindsets when they try to select what it is that they're trying to invest in. So on that note then, the environment, social and governance considerations we found to be particularly prevalent now. And I think in the developing countries, or I say nearly developed countries like Malaysia, the ESG compliance requirements are going to be a particular challenge going forwards. The reason being, historically, our industries are not necessarily considering technology as a means to create more green products and more environmentally sustainable products. It's much more about production, margins and volumes, right? Of late, recently, I've seen in our local bourse, companies have had impact due to investors pulling out because of ESG non-compliance, or even the prospect of ESG compliance not being there in the near future, right? So I think money is quite fickle these days, and this is something which I think technology parks must pay careful attention to. Some of the technology parks I've worked with in Malaysia are still trying to balance between what was the industry before and what's the industry to come, right? And I think this is the view that will probably best explain that. So on one side, you see what is most of Asia's, I think, industrial parks. Today is an empty day, I think, in these factories, but you can see, you know, they will be populated by a lot of low-cost labor, and the factories are quite disorganized, and in terms of environmental impact, I found in some of the designs of the industrial parks that I've been involved with, that are trying to move to higher value industries to be tenants in these parks. They struggle with this requirement of A-grade effluent, for example, coming out of their technology park. So they tend to try and compensate for what they believe is going to be performance of companies which may be tenants there, which may look more like the factory, on this side, the factories on this side, who may claim to be environmentally friendly on paper, but at the end of the day, in terms of performance and the actual effluent, it may become an issue. And so you find central effluent processing plants being included into technology parks when actually compliance should be at the factory level. So on that note then, when you look at the new factories which are emerging, and I'll cover one of these a bit later. Down there you see the UMW High Value Manufacturing Park, which was actually designed by my company. These new industrial parks are facilitated by organizations which also themselves are involved with high value industries. And so by understanding deeply what the requirements of the industries are, only then can they be successful in facilitating what are going to be the new industries going forward, right? And when we look at countries as a whole, I think Southeast Asia, most countries are now beginning to reflect this kind of change in focus for industrial development. This is Malaysia. Not so long ago, this is our GDP pie. It's still quite relevant today. And we find that manufacturing consists quite a large part of the economy, albeit the commodities and services. When it comes to services, there's a lot of land and property transactions there, are still dominating the GDP, right? There's an over-reliance on cost of labor, which is now being addressed in the 12th Malaysia Plan, which has just been launched. And the idea is to shift to the knowledge economy, where more automation and the Internet of Things plays a major role in the development of these industries. Now, moving from one side, from this side to that side, is a big leap, because what is happening is that you are shifting from a GDP model, and as far as the economic planning is concerned, towards what is a more economic complexity model. And economic complexity means that your economy is built off industrial building blocks which are very agile and able to adapt to new technologies, and therefore can adapt with the kind of products that will appear as requirements evolve in the market, right? So this is then reflected in more detail in our 12th Malaysia Plan. Just thought I'd share this because this is a Malaysian aspiration. The shared prosperity vision shows environmental sustainability, economic empowerment, and social re-engineering as the core thrusts of transforming the economy. Now, these are very ambitious goals for countries where labor dependence for cost arbitrage has been the predominant means for, shall I say, profitability, right? So this mindset shift, I think, is going to be mirrored everywhere in Southeast Asia. But we need to understand, that in fact, these kind of ambitions need to be facilitated. And I think as technology parks, this is something which technology parks in Asia must be very sentient of. I know in Korea and in Japan, where technology is much more developed, or technology industries are much more developed, these are given, right? So, but having said that, in other places, and some of the listeners on this cast might be more familiar with this transition that is happening, certainly in Malaysia, and I'm sure most of Southeast Asia, apart from maybe Singapore, yeah. So as an example of coopetition, the aerospace industry is one of the best. It's been in this business of coopetition for probably the longest time. I think this is one of the most significant examples, I think, right? So the partnership between GE, which is an American company, and Safran, which is a French conglomerate, have produced the LEAP-X engine, which is a development from the CFM engine. The LEAPAC engine, I think most people will be familiar with because it powers the A320 and the 737 aircraft, which is most of the low-cost carriers will carry one of these two aircraft, right? So it is 60% of the world's market. This is one of the most successful products in aerospace ever. And in fact, it's by two companies which I think you can almost split the engine in half, yeah? The front being Safran and the back being GE, right? So literally joined at the hip, this engine of Coopetition, because on other platforms, these two companies might be competing very heavily against one another. So how do they manage these things, right? Now for aerospace, it is a complex industry from day one because of the safety requirements. And when you're focused on something which may itself be more important than profits, right? It sounds very interesting, that kind of concept, but if a plane crashes, all your profits are down the toilet anyway. So that kind of safety record for an engine that must continue for probably 20 to 30 years, continuous improvement, continuous operations with maintenance in between, right? And it has to be flawless, requires a Coopetition which is of another level, I think, than compared to what many consumer industries may be used to. So I think the point here is that it's very possible to co-opt on really complex projects for a very long term. So this partnership has now just been extended to 2050, right? So Malaysia has seen this as an opportunity and therefore has identified it in the 12 Malaysia Plan as a gateway industry. So going from this side to that side, yeah, sorry, this side to that side, we find the supply chain, the value chain that aerospace develops in order to have the products that we see, right? And with those capabilities, that level of capabilities and that level of complexity in their manufacturing and parts, components, repair and development processes, companies are able to go into other high-end industries. And I think technology parks in Malaysia are now beginning to have to facilitate manufacturing of this nature, as opposed to before what we showed, which was very much more labor intensive. These ones are much higher mix, much lower volumes, right? Probably factors in some cases of thousands in terms of compared to consumer electronics perhaps before, where your minimum order quantities are in the thousands. These products are in a much lower volume, but every product therefore is at a higher level of reliability and a higher level of value, right, to the company in terms of sale and margin. So when you deal with these kind of products, the technology requirement is extremely high, and hence Coopetition, we find within the aerospace clusters in Malaysia, people co-op much easier than in other clusters, we found. Because there's not so much us looking over the fence at our competitors, supposedly, right? It's us looking across the fence at our potential collaborator and seeing what new contracts can we win together, right? So industrial parks in Malaysia, which are thematically aerospace, there are quite a few. Here are some major examples. Typically, these parks will have an annual product, right, of between, I would have said, 5 to 10 billion US dollars. In some cases, there could be more as the industry develops, but it is transitioning. Most of these parks are also transitioning from what was the more high labor content to higher value content, right? Some of them are being incepted as such, like the UMW High Value Manufacturing Park. But Kulim High Tech Park, for example, is going from middle level industry to for higher level industry, which is up in the north. Okay. So these technology parks are also featuring very heavily in the plans I showed earlier, the 12 Malaysia Plan and then state level plans. This is an excerpt of work that we did for the Selangor state, which is the biggest state in Malaysia. The richest state in Malaysia, not the biggest state in Malaysia. And here you see that the state has looked at cluster development, investment strategies, regional development strategies, digital government and economic management, and then knowledge framework development, which is the ability to leverage on people and knowledge resources to power industrial transformations. So again, when I've advised industrial parks or technology parks that are being developed, we've done probably about 3 or 4 of these parks now under my company. It takes a while for what is a land mindset, land development mindset, to shift to a value creation mindset. And so this is something I think will, if well facilitated, can be a major boon to countries to invest, so to bring inward investment, foreign direct investors. Okay. So for the state that we were working with, we had planned a transition that went from the current state, right, which is industry 1 to 3, and then it's going up there towards the matured state with transitionary points. Now, these transitionary points, again, is something which I think technology parks must be sentient of, because there are industries that are within these parks will themselves be evolving, and evolving at a much faster rate, particularly because they are driven now by entrepreneurs, no longer necessarily by large conglomerates, and companies like we showed earlier, which will grow at phenomenal rates. Right? So when you're dealing with these kind of companies, your facilitation of them, is almost personal, because they themselves are involved with the development and the transformation of their organization. So I think this is something which the more advanced technology parks are sentient of, but the older ones, they want to, a 10, 15-year lease of a factory, and they want to have very little to do with it once it's done. So I think this is where transformation in technology parks in terms of management of them are quite important. So where are we going and as far as industry is concerned? As technologies go up what is the exponential curve, we find that the acceleration of technology implies that the industrial basis or the industrial realities will now start to evolve. So in Malaysia, the first 3 levels of maturity that we see on the chart over there, right? At maturity level 1, this is usually where the government will send out its investment relations teams or investment development teams, and it tries to bring in anchor organizations. So every level that I've drawn there shows, let's say, a complete product, let's say a car, right? Every dark line that you see there is a potential foreign direct investor that they bring in for different parts of this car. But not necessarily the ability to produce a whole car, for example, or a mobile phone, as the case may be, right? And then strategy, national strategy would be to incentivize the growth of these companies. And Malaysia, if you go up to the north in Penang, you see a lot of growth from the 80s till today of the electronics firms. So companies like Intel, companies like Motorola, they were the first anchors at the bottom that you see, those narrow bands, which then became large conglomerates. And the ambition is then slowly, as the industry matures, you see the bands in the middle, which are the SMEs, right? So this is the industrial development philosophy of, I think, most Southeast Asian countries, trying to bring in FDI and then growing these supply chains until finally you can deliver a whole car or a whole mobile phone, right? But the problem is, as technology now goes towards what we call the singularity, that means collaboration on a global basis for technology development has become at hyper speed. You find now the requirements for smaller, more agile units, which is what you see the little boxes are, which can networked by a digital network. So that could be a 5G network, it could be lots of different things. It could be a Starlink by Elon Musk, for example. And these guys can collaborate at any point to produce a product for specification, right? That kind of agility and the ability to look at costs more transparently with blockchain technologies in tow means that you will find products being produced for specification for longer term use at more competitive prices. And the little green boxes that you see there shows that companies from other industries with other complementary capabilities could co-opt with companies in traditional industries. So in aerospace, we find today there are people who are coming from the electronics industry, which are showing us how to do things better for, let's say, aerospace structures manufacturing. So new knowledge coming into business. So competition could be actually between industry verticals, not only within one industry vertical. So these complexities, again, how do technology parks then facilitate these changes, right? So like I said, entrepreneurship is now the driver, right? It's a major driver because entrepreneurs actually have a different value system. This is Joseph Schumpeter. I'm not sure how many people would have studied them in economic school or as part of their university degrees. But Joseph Schumpeter was an economist, you can see there, from 1883 to 1950. And his theory of creative destruction, which basically says the new commodity, the new technology, the new source of supply, the new type of organization which strikes not at the margins of profits and the outputs of existing firms, but at their foundations and their very lives. What is he actually saying is that as innovation, the nature of innovation is to destroy basically margins, right? Every time we innovate, what will happen is that the older product which was incumbent in the market that had a certain margin will now become slowly obsolete, right? So the next variant of the mobile phone and so on and so forth, the competition gets tighter and tighter and tighter. It squeezes out the margins. I think many of people in the industry will understand what this means and the pain that you will feel when you come towards the point where it's all commoditized. I think a lot of consumer electronics today is at 1% or less margins, right? Whereas maybe it has started earlier on in its life at a much higher level, maybe 20% margins. Now this is the nature of creative destruction, and the speed when I showed on the previous graph of this happening now is accelerating. So if you are now in an industry and you're thinking of investing in a capital that's going to last you for 30 years and you're just going to make money, you're sadly mistaken, right? This is not going to last much longer. Your ride is almost over. And I think that the entrepreneurs are coming after you, effectively. And what do they look like, right? So this is what the entrepreneurs look like. I like this picture here, right? 138 billion in one picture and not a single Gucci belt inside. Right? This is the values of the new entrepreneurs. Because where did they start? So if you see Elon Musk used to spend $1 a day and eat hot dogs every day, right? He did not come from a privileged background per se, although his parents were not poor, but he built everything from ground up, right? And they constantly go through major tribulations, like you see Elon Musk saying, I had 3 days left. I think he had 3 days left 3 times or 4 times in his entire career before he became today the richest man in the world. I know the people from MTDC had met him, I think, earlier on when he was still working out of a garage. So that's not too long ago, right? So these geeks effectively are taking over the world with a new value system. And the old values of the fat cat, accruing wealth for his own benefit, now beginning to erode. Why? The new generations now are not accepting this as a something acceptable for businesses to continue doing, i.e. enriching just a few. So although many criticisms can be put against Gates and Musk, but I think you can see this evolution of the entrepreneurs. Gates being a very, very famous philanthropist now, but not just that he gives his money, but you look at most of his time, it's spent in trying to solve technologically real-world problems like sanitation and so on and so forth. Now, Musk is an engineer first before anything else. He famously said in an interview when he was asked, what's your business plan? And he basically said this, what business plan? That's a business with no business plan, which is now the biggest business in the world potentially. So I think all those guys doing MBAs are probably scratching their heads right now, wondering what it is that they've done for the 3 years of their life. So these value systems that these guys are driving are going to drive very different expectations from technology parks. These guys are going to look at partnerships. They're going to look at where is it they can do business, where it'll be sustainable. They want to talk to people. They want to talk to someone who's in charge, right? They won't just send necessarily, third, fourth level in command. Even if it's third, fourth level in command, the value system will still be very strong, and those guys will be empowered, right? So these new value systems, if you look at the deep tech that they are involved with, let's see Elon Musk playing with his flamethrower. This one company is covering a whole host of disruptive technologies, and most of which are becoming successful, right? So everything from disrupting the mobility industry right down to disrupting thinking, right? So the Neuralink project that Elon Musk is funding is not the only one in the world at the moment, but aims to connect people's brains to the computers and then to the internet. And then on the other side of the world, you've got China doing quantum computing. So what you could have, in the near future could be people just plugging into the net and lending their brain space, to a global network of brains solving problems, right? Now that's interesting to think because it sounds like it's Star Trek, but actually when you look at how quickly these technologies and this company has grown in a very short space of time, it tells you what is going to be more and more the reality in the next 10 years. Now, if you compare that to the developing economies in Southeast Asia and the readiness, I think, for example, Malaysia at the moment is aspiring towards this kind of speed, but is far behind, right? So the technology parks in Malaysia, I think some of them have begun to understand this and are trying to then facilitate, right, these kind of changes, right? Because one of the biggest changes, for example, is the as-a-service business model. So, mobility as a service, software as a service where it started, and so on and so forth as a service. These as-a-service business models have the technology enablers which have allowed now for them to be realized, like Uber, digital platforms, fintech, right, and soon cryptocurrency playing a role in there, has required new shifts in skills and jobs, right? So I think, today I'm in the studio with many people, supporting this development, but, I think maybe 30 years ago, they would have had probably tons more equipment than they do today, but probably 5 years from now, we're probably one 16-year-old doing this whole lot, right? So these guys will have to find another job. So, so when you look at this, this automated interconnected system now will create new requirements and new value systems. So here you see citizen welfare, inclusivity, resilience, all these kinds of values now becoming important to businesses going forward, right? And here's one of my favorite examples of as-a-service business. So Kowe is a company that's very popular in Malaysia. Everybody's got one water dispenser in their house, and now they've got the Kowe beds. And this is amazing because if you think about it, it's a Korean company, particularly for the beds and the water dispensers. They basically installed a Korean product in my house and then charged me for it. And then after that, I don't even own it, right? So, but having said that, they clean it every 3 months, which is probably the most cleaning it's ever had for years. And I am now going to be part of this ecosystem. So having said that, in order to enter into that ecosystem, they need to co-opt with other companies in Malaysia and people and individuals. So I think the competition between people and companies and companies is going to be a complex landscape going forward, right? And that's something which is given by sort of this slide here, this summary of three quotes from three major references. But basically the first thing says that days of the corporate lone wolf are over. I think a lot of people still are trying to get their heads around what that actually means, So last week, GE, General Electric, has broken up into 3 companies again, right? The change that was brought about by such changes to large corporations' realities, industrial realities, means that they have to evolve themselves much faster now, almost like startups. The mobile devices are now connecting more and more people. So Malaysia is just rolling out its 5G network at the moment, and supply chains are no more linear. They're more dynamic, and the COVID-19 has accelerated this quite tremendously. Right, so I think in the next 5 years, the way supply chains will work, logistics will work, will be quite significantly evolved. Now, you as a technology park, then a supply chain is very key to your tenants' survivability. So it seems to indicate that technology parks as businesses themselves, as ecosystems themselves, must understand these changes, right? So in any development, so this is some of my company's work, right? We've isolated 5 major key values that are within any business ecosystem: human capital, technology, industry, development, and land. So for technology parks, people tend to focus on development and land, but in fact, the 3 other elements here, human capital, technology, and industry ecosystem. Industry ecosystem is companies. That's something you're familiar with, trying to bring in companies as tenants. But companies require technologists and human capital to feed them to grow. And without the tenancy, what you will find is that without the people, you can't drive the value. If you can't drive the value, you cannot increase the value of your development or your land. So these things are actually today completely interrelated. And I think the understanding of how these things are interrelated is something that companies and technology parks must master. So you are now going from what is a current state to an end state, right? And a current value to an end value. This is a major thing that people need to understand, because in many cases, people just go from a current state to an end state. That means I don't have a car company in Malaysia today, I'll create a car company. At the end state, I have a car company. The current value is I don't have a competitive car company in Malaysia, and the end value was I want a world-class car company, right? Now, you can achieve the end state without the end value, and we've got a lot of examples of that in Malaysia. Yeah. So in a lot of Southeast Asian countries also built up by a lot of foreign direct investors. If, in fact, the foreign direct investors did not divest technology or capabilities within these companies, what happens is that the end value is not realized for the country, but the end state is realized for the investors, right? So again, if countries then are working with technology parks, then these strategies need to be aligned. So what we've also developed in my company is a model. And what we said is we looked at these value propositions and their assets associated with these value propositions, both financial and then non-financial returns, and then look at all the players and how these guys are interrelated. Now, the interrelation between these things are fundamental to technology parks, because without the top end of this chart, the bottom end doesn't work anymore. Right? And what is happening at the top end, I think all the slides prior to this show that it's evolving at a very high rate. Okay. So once you have such a model, then you need your solutions, your governance, your actors, your structures, your mechanisms, your projects, and these are the ways then I think technology parks need to look at ecosystem development and see who they are collaborating. A lot of technology parks in Malaysia collaborate with the central government of Malaysia or the state government or both at the same time, right, to achieve these kinds of outcomes. But it's still early days. Right, so this is one case study example, and this is the final few slides that I have. UMW is an automaker. It's a contract manufacturer for Toyota, but it's a Malaysian-owned company. And in fact, the work that we did with them and the work that they then did subsequent to that has filled up all of these different value propositions. So they started originally the group with automotive and heavy equipment manufacturing. Today they're in aerospace and engineering. They entered into the aerospace industry as a tier 1 supplier to Rolls-Royce from no experience. So here they were collaborating, I think, with companies, and interestingly, they were collaborating with some of Rolls-Royce's competitors. Safran, for example, is a Rolls-Royce competitor, but the collaboration was about creating a capability and a competence in Malaysia that eventually Safran would be able to leverage on. So I think there was a lot of open discussion between the organizations to see how they could support UMW, right? Although Rolls-Royce played the major role. So it's a major investment, 750 million ringgit, about $200 million US dollars, as a single source supplier. And the first time a Malaysian company with zero experience became a tier 1 to a global aerospace OEM, right? And then I'll just go on from there. And then off the back of that, they created the UMW High Value Manufacturing Park, right? So they had around the aerospace facility a lot of land that they needed to develop, and what they did was they envisaged a technology park, right? So my company, as the company that was there to support the original technology development, also then developed the content behind it, then worked with architects and so on and so forth to come up with this technology park, which is managed centrally with a UMW team, which has been trained now to talk about technology, to engage in technology. So they go all around the world promoting this park. They build to suit, and they also have some ready-built facilities. For environmental sustainability, as you see, it's very green. They did not change the landscape of the park as you would normally see in Southeast Asian countries. We just cut it flat. This wasn't. They maintained the topography. They provide business support center, and they work with, they have an R&D center there as well. So I think this is the future of technology parks. They bring together collaborators, competitors, and at the end of the day, it's all about realizing the new value systems and new industries as being envisaged by the entrepreneurs. I think with that, I can take some questions. Okay, so we've got the first one here with regards to aerospace industry, space technology revolution, like SpaceX, the way to go. Is there something similar in planning for Malaysia? Yes, so I think you need to look at SpaceX as a disruptor on several fronts, right? So first, it's in the transportation of people into space and goods into space and this renewable platform. I think the way to go here, if you look at the platform itself, a space shuttle used to cost 3.5 billion US dollars for every launch. SpaceX is what, I don't know, 100 million maybe at most, if not less, and it's recurring. So with that kind of business model, you actually have space as a service, right? Space transportation and service. So is it the way to go? Yes. But to achieve it, I think you need to see all of the different value propositions that need to be in place, the collaborations and so on and so forth, in order to deliver such a service. And in Malaysia, we do have an aerospace industry, which I showed. So SpaceX is being discussed with at the moment. But the bigger space industry is Starlink and the communications industry, which is being enabled by space. So that is definitely something that the Malaysian government has a clear focus on in the 12 Malaysia plan. I mentioned UMWs, decided to optimize within the, is this better option compared to, no, I didn't say that they returned to their course. I think they kept their course. What they have done is diversify, right? So they diversified into aerospace, and they're looking at mobility, they're looking at new environmental technologies, wastewater treatment and so on and so forth, because they've got such a big industrial footprint, they can learn from what their current industrial footprint has to teach them, and they are evolving that into new solutions for industry. So actually, no, the opposite, they're actually going the other direction. All right, so I think that's the last of the questions. Thank you very much for having me here, and I hope you learned something.
All right, thank you, Najib, for the very enlightening presentation. I had gained some new knowledge and found the morning to be informative, and I hope you do too. Now, dear delegates, we will have another break and resume the conference in 1 hour. So please take this time to also visit the virtual booths on the platform. We have, as I was made to understand, a virtual photo booth as well as games on the platform, or if not, take this opportunity to maybe say hi to one another. So we will see you back here in 1 hour at 2 p.m. Kuala Lumpur time. We'll see you then.